of policy, by the way, I wanted to turn real quick here to the White House's latest release on gun policy. They put out a fact sheet on some of the initiatives that they're planning now. And interestingly, it's something that you actually find useful or find that you could support, right? Which is not been the case with most of what the White House has done to this point, most of what President Biden has put forth. Can you give us a little bit of detail on what the new initiatives are and why there's something that you find could be actually effective?
Sure. Yeah. So if you haven't heard of this new initiative, you're not alone, because it seems to me like the White House sort of went out of its way to not promote it in ways that they have other sort of gun violence prevention initiatives. So this one that they came out with early in November is really focused on suicide prevention. There are several sorts of subpoints to this. But, this is something where right off the bat, when we just talked about this, suicides are 2/3 of gun deaths every year. It is a major, major aspect of gun violence. So approaching it from that starting point already off the bat, much better starting point than some of these other initiatives, like how do we take away pistol braces, so that sort of thing. What was encouraging to me is that it's actually couched in a very helpful way. I think a lot of times when people talk about gun suicide from a gun control perspective, you walk away with a sense of they think the gun in and of itself is dangerous, instead of this idea of, well, look, when someone who is not in a healthy, stable state of mind, when someone is in a time of crisis, it doesn't matter whether it's a gun or any other lethal means. We're talking about reducing access to all lethal means, including firearms, in that point. And I think they did a good job of sort of approaching it from that perspective. So anyways, the first main component of this is what they refer to as a comprehensive military and veteran suicide prevention strategy, which is great. It seems to be focused a lot on educating the public and educating doctors, how to talk about, frankly, something that we as gun owners always should be concerned with, which is, lethal means safety, having sort of a crisis response plan for when you or someone in your household or, someone that you care about starts showing signs of being in crisis. What is your plan? As gun owners, we plan for, every sort of threat under the sun. And I think it's also good to talk about how do we plan for mental health contingencies. So that sort of crisis response education, specifically for veterans. That part is largely
wonderful.
Unobjectionable, right?
Right. Well, I think it also comes down to, we'll go over some of the other things in there too, but coercion, right? I guess the aspect of force here, these are all policies that they put forth that aren't trying to force people to not buy a gun that the president doesn't like, or, force them to even give up a gun or a magazine that the president doesn't approve of.
Right.
These are all more voluntary measures that are designed to encourage people to more safely store their firearms, or even just like educate them on options, right? So one of these is trying to come up with, I think they refer to them as storage maps, but basically resources for individuals who are in crisis, to say, hey, here's where you can safely store your firearms in your area, which is great. Those sorts of things, this idea of engaging the gun community and helping that community sort of engage with itself in a healthy way. You're right. Instead of this very top down, frankly, over criminalization of some of these aspects, lock it up or else, or else you get locked up.
Right. So I think it's just a much more helpful starting place for sure.
Yeah, because it's always interesting where you see agreement between even gun control activists and gun owners can be in this aspect of how do we help people who are having mental health emergencies that shouldn't be around their firearms, or should be able to take a break from being around their firearms when they're going through something like that. And the different approach tends to be that the gun control advocates would want to force them to lock up their guns all the time when they're not actively using them, right? Under pain of arrest, right? Which is going to oftentimes turn people away from seeking help at all in situations. That's the downside of that. Right. And whereas on the other side, you have gun owners or gun rights activists who want to take a more voluntary approach where, say something like, and you testified to this, I believe before Congress, right? Where, you know, if I'm having a mental health crisis and I need someone else to hold my guns for me during that time period.
Don't get in my way with extra laws.
Yeah, because some of these universal background check laws don't just require a background check on sales, but on all transfers. And in that situation, that would be a transfer, which would mean you'd have to go through a background check. You'd have to take the guns to a dealer, an intermediary.
Yeah, essentially legally transfer that title to another person.
So it seems like there's two different approaches here, oftentimes with coercion versus making it as easy as possible for people to give up their guns for a temporary period of time while they seek help for their mental health issues.
Or even just to feel like they can go, ask for help without the first response being, well, now we're going to inform, we're going to narc on you to the government and punish you for it.
But this seems like perhaps a more of a middle ground here approach from the administration, which is interesting to see, especially after, as you alluded to earlier, some of the other initiatives that they've undertaken thus far, which are much more coercive, that trying to redefine what a pistol brace is so that it becomes illegal to possess, essentially, or trying to redefine the very definition of what a firearm is so that the ATF can have more power to regulate homemade firearms. So, those approaches both are obviously very coercive and controversial, whereas this approach is much more collaborative and voluntary and is not getting, as you alluded to earlier, is not getting much attention to this point. And it doesn't seem like the administration is putting very much effort behind promoting it for some reason.
Well, because it's not like the sexy part of gun control, right? Like it's not the platform that he ran on. And I don't want to get like too glowing over this because there are aspects of it that, for example, one aspect is that the Department of Justice finalizing a rule that apparently has been in the works since 2016, and that they don't actually, tell you what the wording of this potential rule is, but finalizing a rule, and I'm quoting here, clarifying firearms dealers' statutory obligations to make available for purchase compatible secure gun storage or gun safety devices, which, if this is some sort of, as the DOJ has done under this administration very recently, some sort of, we are rewriting the law as it exists to now force gun stores to act in certain ways or do or not do certain things that are outside the confines of, what Congress has said, to put this extra burden on them, less great. More coercive, less great. But again,
there's still stuff to watch, for sure. I believe if I remember hearing correctly about this from a dealer a couple years ago, that dealt with what standard the gun safes that they sell in stores would have to meet. And so there could be some controversy around that if they set that standard to some level that's not reasonable.
Yeah.
But
they do it.
I think it's something to watch for sure. Yeah. But it seems like the thrust of this.
Right. Because the next thing they do is then pivot to essentially customer education. This issuing of best practices for federal firearms dealers, about, essentially how to encourage and inform and, talk to their customers about, safe storage, about, sort of mental health options, which, again, it's this fine line between wanting to force FFLs to essentially act as, mandatory educators, and sort of encouraging them to take reasonable steps to promote these sorts of practices. So those things are good. It is good when you have especially first-time gun buyers who are receiving, or at least have the ability to receive educational materials about aspects of gun ownership they may not have thought about. Though I'd also say we as the gun community should be encouraging this sort of training and education, regardless of whether the federal government says we ought to.
Right.
But it's still always good. Like that is, again, just a better starting point. Working to educate people on like actual best practices than saying, that this coercive approach of, we're going to go full on like some, countries in Europe where we are going to threaten to send people to your home to investigate whether or not it's properly locked up with these surprise visits, which is what you hear some people now going to. It's like, oh, well, that's how we should enforce these laws.